I'm Eleanor Thompson, 67 years old, with wrinkled hands that tell stories my children no longer care to hear. After years of unanswered calls and forgotten birthdays, the gilded invitation arrived unexpectedly. A celebration of excellence, it proclaimed, though the subtext was clear. My children had become strangers wrapped in designer clothes and achievements. When Nathan said, "We thought you'd enjoy seeing what real accomplishment looks like," something broke inside me. But fate had other plans that evening. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. I was born in Mapleton, a speck of a town in the Midwest where everyone knew your business before you did. My childhood was unremarkable but happy. My father worked at the local factory. My mother taught piano lessons from our living room. I was smart but not exceptional, pretty but not stunning. The kind of girl who blended into yearbook photos rather than stood out. At 19, I fell in love with William Thompson, a young man with kind eyes and ambitious dreams. We married under the maple trees in my parents' backyard. My simple white dress a hand-me-down from my older cousin. We were young, so young but deeply in love and convinced that would be enough. Madison came first, our beautiful baby girl with William's thoughtful eyes and my stubborn chin. She was barely 2 when Nathan arrived, colicky and demanding but with a smile that could melt winter. Bradley completed our family 3 years later, a sweet-natured boy who followed his siblings around like they hung the moon and stars. We weren't wealthy, but William's job as a bank manager and my part-time work as a teacher's aide kept us comfortable. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on Elm Street, with a yard just big enough for a swing set and my small vegetable garden. The children shared bedrooms, Madison had her own, while the boys bunked together. Those early years were chaotic but sweet. Bedtime stories stretched into midnight conversations. Weekend picnics at the local park. Christmas mornings with more laughter than presents. When William died suddenly of a heart attack, our world shattered. He was 42. Madison was 16, Nathan 14, and Bradley 11. I remember standing at the funeral, my children clustered around me like frightened birds, wondering how I would possibly manage alone. The life insurance barely covered the funeral and outstanding medical bills. I took a full-time position at Mapleton Elementary teaching 3rd grade, plus evening shifts at the local diner 3 nights a week. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I learned to grade papers during my breaks at the diner, to function on 4 hours of rest, to stretch a pound of ground beef into 3 different meals. Madison was entering her senior year of high school with dreams of Columbia University. Her grades were stellar, her potential unlimited. I took out a second mortgage on the house to help with her tuition. "It's an investment in your future, honey," I told her when she expressed concern about the cost. What I didn't say was how I'd lain awake calculating and recalculating numbers that never quite added up. Nathan showed extraordinary aptitude for computers. While other mothers complained about video games, I scraped together money for programming books. When he was accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship, I sold my wedding ring to cover what the scholarship didn't. Bradley, my youngest, wanted to become a doctor. By then, there was little left to sell or mortgage. I took on a 3rd job doing administrative work for a local dentist on weekends. My body ached constantly, but what was physical pain compared to the alternative of clipped wings? The distance grew so gradually I barely noticed at first. Madison's calls from New York became shorter, less frequent. Her stories featured new friends with impressive connections, internships at prestigious firms, a world I couldn't relate to. When she landed her first job at a top law firm, I sent flowers I couldn't afford. She sent a brief thank you text 3 days later. Nathan moved to San Francisco after graduation and launched a tech startup that grew exponentially. Our conversations dwindled to perfunctory birthday and holiday calls. He bought his first apartment at 26, his first sports car at 28. Meanwhile, I was still driving the same Honda with 200,000 miles on the odometer. Bradley's transformation was perhaps the most painful. My sweet boy who once brought me wildflowers, just because, became increasingly impatient with my questions about medical school. He married Sophia, a dermatologist from a wealthy family, in a lavish ceremony where I felt like an afterthought in a dress I'd found on clearance. They settled in Boston, had twins I was invited to visit twice a year at most. Holidays became exercises in rejection. We're spending Christmas with Sophia's family this year. The partners' retreat is over Thanksgiving weekend. Madison's taking her boyfriend to Paris for New Year's. I learned to make smaller turkeys, to find joy in the company of friends and neighbors, to pretend the empty chairs didn't matter. I watched their lives unfold through social media posts and occasional phone calls. Madison became partner at her firm, bought a penthouse with views of Central Park. Nathan's company went public, his net worth suddenly in the millions. Bradley established a thriving surgical practice, moved into a mansion in Brookline. Despite everything, I remained fiercely proud of them. Their success was, in some small way, mine too. I had done what I set out to do, given them opportunities one never had. If the cost was their presence in my life, well, that was the price of their freedom to soar. I retired from teaching at 65, my pension modest but sufficient for my simple needs. I volunteered at the library, tended my garden, joined a book club. My life was small but not unhappy. I had my health, my friends, my memories. I had made peace with my children's absence, or so I thought until that invitation arrived. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer. The envelope was thick, cream-colored parchment with my name and address written in elegant calligraphy, so different from the usual contents of my mailbox that I initially wondered if it had been delivered to the wrong house. Inside was a card bordered in gold leaf. A celebration of excellence, it announced in ornate script, honoring the remarkable achievements of the Thompson family. The event would be held at the Grand Hotel downtown, the most luxurious venue in our city, a place I'd passed countless times but never entered. The date was 3 weeks away. At the bottom, smaller text indicated formal attire was required. I sat at my kitchen table, turning the invitation over in my hands. My children had not invited me to an event in years. Madison's law firm promotion party, Nathan's company launch, Bradley's hospital department head appointment. I'd learned about these milestones after they happened, through brief calls or sometimes social media posts. The house phone rang, startling me. Madison's name appeared on the caller ID. Another rarity. "Hello, Madison," I said, trying to keep the surprise from my voice. "Mother," she replied, her tone businesslike. "I assume you've received the invitation to the event." "Yes, just now. It looks very fancy." "It's a significant occasion. Nathan's company was just valued at over $1 billion. Bradley has been appointed to the board of National Surgical Associates, and I've been named one of the top 50 lawyers in the country." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "I'm so proud of all of you." A brief pause. "Yes, well, we thought it appropriate to have a formal celebration. Many important people will be there, business associates, colleagues, potential investors." Something in her tone made me ask, "And you'd like me to attend?" "Of course," she said, though nothing in her voice suggested enthusiasm. "Your family. Besides, people are always curious about where we came from, our background, our humble beginnings." The way she said humble made it sound like a deficiency rather than a virtue. "I see," I replied quietly. "The dress code is formal, Mother. Do you have something suitable?" The question carried an assumption that I wouldn't. "I'll find something appropriate," I assured her. "Good. We've reserved a room for you at the hotel. The event will run late, and we thought it would be easier than you driving home afterward." A thoughtful gesture? Or a way to ensure I wouldn't embarrass them by leaving early? I couldn't be sure anymore. After we hung up, I called Patricia, my best friend of 30 years and fellow retired teacher. "They invited you to what?" she exclaimed after I explained. "A celebration of their achievements. At the Grand Hotel. After barely acknowledging your existence for years?" Patricia had never been one to mince words. "Doesn't that strike you as odd?" "Maybe they're trying to reconnect," I suggested, voicing the hope I'd been nurturing since the invitation arrived. "Ellie, honey, I hope that's it. But something doesn't feel right." "Why now? And why a public event rather than a private family dinner?" Her questions echoed my own misgivings. Still, I wanted to believe the best. "They're my children, Patty. Whatever their reasons, I want to be there." Patricia sighed. "Then you'll need a dress. Something that makes you look like $1 million. Let's go shopping this weekend." The dress hunt proved challenging on my limited budget. Department stores offered beautiful options that cost more than my monthly pension. Discount outlets had affordable prices but styles too youthful or casual for the occasion. "This is ridiculous," Patricia declared after our third unsuccessful store. "Let's try that consignment boutique on Maple Street. Rich ladies sell their barely worn designer clothes there." At Encore Boutique we struck gold, a floor-length navy blue dress with delicate beading at the neckline and a flattering silhouette. The tag showed it had originally cost nearly $2,000, but as a last-season item, it was marked down to $95. Still a splurge for me, but worth it. While trying it on, I thought about the last formal event I'd attended, a school fundraiser 5 years earlier. How strange that my return to society would be at my children's celebration, where I would be essentially a guest in their world rather than them in mine. That evening, I pulled out photo albums I hadn't looked through in years. Madison in her high school graduation cap, her smile wide and innocent. Nathan holding up the science fair trophy he'd won in 8th grade. Bradley on his first bicycle, William running alongside to ensure he wouldn't fall. Had I done something wrong as a mother? Made them feel unloved or unsupported? Created expectations too heavy to bear? Or was this simply the natural order children growing up away beyond? The questions kept me awake that night, memories flickering through my mind like an old film reel. William would have known how to navigate this. He always knew exactly what to say to the children, how to reach them when they pulled away. Without him, I had done my best, but perhaps my best hadn't been enough. Still, as I finally drifted toward sleep, I allowed myself to hope. Perhaps this invitation was an olive branch. Perhaps my children had realized what they'd lost in their climb to success. Perhaps we could find our way back to each other. Different but still family. I should have listened to Patricia's intuition. I should have prepared myself better for what was coming. But hope is a powerful anesthetic against doubt, and I wanted so badly to believe. The Grand Hotel lived up to its name. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the clouds. Marble floors gleamed beneath my sensible low heels. Well-dressed attendants directed guests with practiced efficiency, their eyes sliding over me with the briefest acknowledgement before moving on to more impressive arrivals. I smoothed my navy dress nervously, suddenly aware of its second-hand status despite Patricia's assurances that it looked perfectly lovely. My single strand of pearls, a 20th anniversary gift from William, felt inadequate amid the diamonds glittering on other women's necks. The ballroom doors were open, revealing a space transformed into a wonderland of white orchids and blue hydrangeas. Ice sculptures caught the light from thousands of tiny bulbs strung overhead like stars. A string quartet played in one corner, their music almost lost beneath the buzz of conversation and the clink of champagne flutes. I spotted Madison first, radiant in a red gown that probably cost more than my yearly pension. She stood in a circle of equally polished people, her laugh perfectly calibrated, not too loud, not too enthusiastic. The Madison I remembered had laughed with her whole body, head thrown back, unconcerned with appearances. She saw me hovering at the entrance and excused herself from her companions. As she approached, I opened my arms instinctively for a hug. She leaned in briefly, barely making contact, her perfume expensive and unfamiliar. "Mother, you made it. The dress is nice." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let me introduce you to some people." "No, how was your trip?" "No, it's good to see you." Just the immediate need to move me along like an item on a checklist. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions where my identity was reduced to "our mother," or sometimes just Eleanor. People shook my hand with polite disinterest, asked cursory questions about my life that they didn't wait to hear answered, then quickly returned to conversations about stock options, vacation homes, and private schools. Nathan found me as I was trying to locate the restrooms for a moment of respite. "Mother." He kissed my cheek briefly. My son, once all gangly limbs and unruly hair, now stood before me in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his hair expertly styled, his posture radiating confidence. "You look well." "Thank you, Nathan. You look very handsome." I searched his face for traces of the boy who used to bring home stray animals and build elaborate forts in the living room. "This is quite the celebration." "Yes, well, we've accomplished a lot since leaving Mapleton." He glanced around the room with undisguised pride. We thought you'd enjoy seeing what real accomplishment looks like. The words landed like a slap. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but something must have shown because he quickly added, "That came out wrong. I just meant it's nice for you to see how far we've come from our modest beginnings." Before I could respond, he was pulled away by a man introducing himself as a potential investor. Nathan didn't bother to include me in the conversation. I finally located Bradley near the bar, deep in conversation with two older men. My youngest had grown stout around the middle, his face fuller than in the rare photos he shared online. Success had added weight but not happiness. The lines around his mouth suggested someone who frowned more than he smiled. "Bradley," I said softly, not wanting to interrupt. He turned, surprise flickering across his features before he composed them into a smile. "Mother. Gentlemen, excuse me a moment." He guided me a few steps away. "I didn't see you arrive. About an hour ago. Madison showed me around a bit." Good. He checked his watch subtly. "Are they taking care of you? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine, thank you." I hesitated, then added, "It would be nice to see the twins. Are they here?" "Sophia took them to her parents for the weekend. School night, you know." The excuse was transparent. The twins were 16 now, hardly toddlers who couldn't stay up past 8. "Of course," I murmured. "Maybe another time." "Definitely," he agreed with no attempt to suggest when such a time might be. "Look, I need to get back to Dr. Abrams over there. Potential hospital donor. We'll catch up properly later, okay?" He was gone before I could respond, back to people who mattered in his new life. I drifted toward a quiet corner, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The young man, his name tag read Carlos, noticed my slightly lost expression. "First time at the Grand, ma'am?" he asked kindly. "Is it that obvious?" He smiled. "Not at all. I just haven't seen you at these kinds of events before."
I'm Eleanor Thompson.
"Those are my children being celebrated tonight." I indicated Madison, Nathan, and Bradley, each holding court in different parts of the room. Carlos's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're the Thompsons' mother? That's wonderful. They must be very proud to have you here." His sincere comment, so at odds with reality, nearly brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Carlos. That's very kind." As he moved on to serve other guests, I contemplated leaving. Clearly, my presence was more obligation than desire for my children. They had built lives that had no room for a retired schoolteacher from a small town, with her unfashionable clothes and outdated references. But something kept me rooted in place, perhaps pride, perhaps stubbornness, perhaps the faint hope that the evening might somehow transform into the reunion I'd foolishly imagined. I watched my children navigate the room with practiced ease. Madison charming a judge with her wit. Nathan demonstrating something on his phone to an impressed circle of listeners. Bradley discussing medical advancements with reverent colleagues. They were strangers to me now. Successful, accomplished strangers who happened to share my DNA and little else. The realization settled heavily in my chest. A dull ache more profound than any physical pain I'd experienced. I remembered them as children, Madison reading stories to her brothers on rainy afternoons. Nathan building a computer from scraps to save us the expense of a new one. Bradley bringing me tea when I was grading papers late into the night. When had those loving children transformed into these polished, distant adults who seemed embarrassed by my very existence? As I pondered this, I noticed a subtle shift in the room's energy. Madison and Nathan had moved closer together near a decorative pillar, their heads bent in conversation. Their expressions were serious, their gestures controlled but emphatic. Something about their body language drew me toward them, an instinct developed through years of detecting trouble brewing among siblings. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but as I approached, planning to ask if everything was all right, their words stopped me cold. "Is she mingling properly?" Nathan was asking, his back to me. "We need her visible but not too prominent." "She's doing fine," Madison replied, sipping her champagne. "Though that dress must be at least 10 years out of style. What did you expect? It's not like she has access to Rodeo Drive in Mapleton." Madison shrugged. "As long as she plays her part tonight, it doesn't matter. The contrast makes our story more compelling anyway." Speaking of which, I've arranged for Bradley to mention her in his speech. The whole rising from humble beginnings narrative. Investors eat that up. Nathan's tone was calculating. Everyone loves a good rags to riches story, especially when the rags are conveniently present for comparison. My heart seemed to stop, then restart with painful clarity. I wasn't here as family. I was here as a prop, living evidence of how far they'd come, how much they'd overcome. Do you think she suspects anything? Madison asked, glancing around but thankfully not in my direction. Mother? Not a chance. She's always been oblivious to subtext. Remember how she never realized Dad was hiding his heart condition from her? Same thing. She takes everything at face value. I stepped back, nearly bumping into a waiter. Their words repeated in my mind like a terrible echo. I had been invited not to celebrate with them, but to serve as a visual reminder of their triumph over their origins. My children had orchestrated this entire evening to showcase their success in contrast to my ordinariness. The room suddenly felt too warm, the lights too bright. I needed air, space to process this betrayal. I made my way toward the hallway, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might engage me in conversation. My chest felt tight, my eyes burning with unshed tears that I refused to let fall in this place. The ladies' restroom was mercifully empty. I locked myself in a stall, sitting fully clothed on the closed toilet lid, and allowed myself 60 seconds of silent anguish. William would have been devastated to see what our children had become. Not because of their success, but because of how that success had warped their values, their perception of what mattered. When I emerged from the stall, I splashed cold water on my face and reapplied my modest lipstick. The woman in the mirror looked older than she had this morning, the lines around her eyes deeper, her expression bereft of the hope that had carried her here. Are you all right? I turned to find an elegant older woman watching me with concern. Her silver hair was styled in a classic bob. Her attire expensive but understated. Yes, thank you. Just needed a moment. She studied me with keen eyes. You're Eleanor Thompson, aren't you? Surprised, I nodded. Yes, I am. I thought so. She extended her hand. Margaret Winters. Though you would have known me as Margaret Klein back when I was in your 3rd grade class at Mapleton Elementary. Margaret Klein. I searched my memory. Teaching for over 40 years meant thousands of students had passed through my classroom. Curly hair. Always reading under her desk during math lessons? She laughed, delighted. That's me. Though the curls are long gone, and I eventually made peace with mathematics. What a wonderful surprise. For the first time that evening, my smile was genuine. What brings you to this event? I'm the executive director of the Children's Education Foundation. We provide scholarships and resources to underprivileged students. She gestured toward the ballroom. Many of our donors are here tonight. But I was thrilled when I saw your name on the guest list. You were. Of course. You changed my life, Mrs. Thompson. Do you remember the book you gave me? The Secret Garden? You wrote inside that I could find magic anywhere if I looked with the right eyes. I remembered now. A painfully shy girl from a troubled home. I'd given her books as an escape, a window to other possibilities. That book made me believe I could create my own magic, Margaret continued. I became a teacher because of you, then eventually moved into educational nonprofit work. That's wonderful, Margaret. Truly. And I'm not the only one. She nodded toward the ballroom. There are at least a dozen of your former students here tonight. Dr. James Wilson, the cardiologist? He was in your class the year his father died. He credits you with keeping him focused on school during that time.
Ist hier, stond?
James is here. And Rachel Fernandez, the state senator. Thomas Green, who runs that architectural firm. All your students, all here tonight. My mind struggled to process this information. I had no idea. Margaret smiled warmly. We've been working on something for months, actually. A scholarship foundation in your name. The Eleanor Thompson Education Fund. We've raised nearly $2 million so far. $2 million. I felt faint. For me. For your legacy. To continue the work you did in that classroom for 43 years. She squeezed my hand. Did your children not tell you? They must have known. We contacted them weeks ago about tonight's announcement. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. My children had known about this tribute. They had deliberately kept it from me, planning instead to use the evening to highlight their own achievements in contrast to my humble life. No, I said quietly. They didn't mention it. Something in my tone must have conveyed the deeper hurt, because Margaret's expression softened with understanding. Well, then this evening will be quite a surprise for everyone, won't it? The announcement is scheduled right after your children's speeches. As we walked back toward the ballroom, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The pain of my children's betrayal remained, but alongside it grew something else. A quiet pride in a different kind of legacy. One measured not in dollars or titles but in lives touched and minds opened. Are you ready, Eleanor? Margaret asked as we paused at the ballroom entrance. I straightened my shoulders, adjusted my pearl necklace. Yes, Margaret. I believe I am. We re-entered the ballroom just as the formal program was beginning. A distinguished man in a tuxedo approached the podium, tapping the microphone to quiet the room. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this celebration of excellence. Tonight we honor the remarkable achievements of the Thompson family, whose contributions to law, technology, and medicine have been truly extraordinary. Polite applause followed as the MC invited Madison to speak first. My daughter ascended the steps with practiced grace, her red dress catching the light dramatically. For a moment, I saw a flash of the little girl who used to put on shows in our living room, demanding attention with her natural charisma. Thank you all for coming tonight, she began, her voice confident and measured. Success is a journey that begins with a single step, and mine began in a small town called Mapleton. What followed was a carefully crafted narrative that positioned her childhood as something to be overcome rather than cherished. She spoke of limited resources and lack of connections as obstacles she had triumphantly surmounted. She mentioned me only briefly, noting that I had done my best with what little we had. I learned early that if I wanted more, I would have to create it for myself, she concluded. And that determination has carried me to where I stand today. Nathan followed with a similar theme, though his focus was more technological. He described building his first computer from salvaged parts because we couldn't afford a real one. He talked about teaching himself programming because there were no opportunities for proper training in our town. The Nathan I remembered had loved those challenges, had thrived on solving problems with limited resources. That joy was entirely absent from his retelling, replaced by a narrative of deprivation overcome through exceptional talent. Bradley spoke last of my children, his medical accomplishments presented as even more impressive given his starting point. He actually used the phrase "despite my circumstances" when describing his journey to becoming a surgeon. I sat quietly through all three speeches, my expression neutral despite the growing ache in my chest. Not once did any of them mention the second mortgage I'd taken out for Madison's tuition, or how I'd sold my wedding ring for Nathan's education, or the weekend job I'd worked to support Bradley's dream. Their success was portrayed as entirely self-made, achieved in spite of their upbringing rather than partially because of it. As Bradley returned to his seat amid enthusiastic applause, I noticed my children exchanging satisfied glances. Their narrative had been delivered perfectly. The successful siblings who had transcended their humble origins through sheer talent and determination. The MC returned to the podium. Truly inspiring stories from the Thompson siblings. And now we have a special announcement from Margaret Winters, Executive Director of the Children's Education Foundation. I saw confusion flicker across my children's faces as Margaret took the stage. This clearly wasn't part of their planned program. Thank you, Margaret began. While we're celebrating remarkable achievement tonight, I'd like to recognize another kind of excellence. The quiet, consistent excellence that shapes lives one day at a time, one child at a time. She paused, her gaze finding me in the audience. Many of you know me as the director of a foundation that has provided educational opportunities to thousands of children. What you may not know is why I dedicated my life to this work. The room had gone completely silent, all attention focused on Margaret. When I was 8 years old, a third-grade teacher gave me a book and told me I could find magic anywhere if I looked with the right eyes. That teacher created a safe space where a frightened, insecure child could discover her own worth. That teacher stayed after school to help struggling students, spent her own money on classroom supplies, and made each of us believe we mattered. Margaret's voice grew stronger. That teacher was Eleanor Thompson. A murmur ran through the crowd as heads turned in my direction. From the corner of my eye, I saw Madison freeze, champagne glass halfway to her lips. Would you join me on stage, Eleanor? Margaret extended her hand toward me. On unsteady legs, I rose and made my way to the podium. As I passed my children's table, I saw matching expressions of shock on their faces. For 43 years, Margaret continued, Eleanor Thompson shaped the minds and hearts of children in Mapleton. She taught reading and writing, yes, but more importantly, she taught compassion, perseverance, and the value of lifting others as you climb. She gestured around the room. I invite any former students of Mrs. Thompson to please stand. To my astonishment, at least 20 people rose from their seats. Successful, accomplished individuals whose faces gradually connected with memories of children from years past. James Wilson, now a renowned cardiologist. Rachel Fernandez, the state senator. Thomas Green, whose architectural firm had designed buildings across the country. Look around, everyone, Margaret said. This is Eleanor's legacy, not measured in dollars or titles but in lives transformed. And tonight, we're thrilled to announce the establishment of the Eleanor Thompson Education Foundation, with an initial endowment of $2 million to continue her work with the next generation. The applause that followed was thunderous. Through tears, I saw my former students smiling at me with genuine affection and respect. I saw the stunned faces of guests who had earlier dismissed me as unimportant. And I saw my children, looking as though the floor had opened beneath them. Eleanor, Margaret said, turning to me, would you like to say a few words? The microphone seemed both an opportunity and a challenge. I could use this moment for retribution, to expose my children's calculated cruelty. Or I could rise above it, demonstrating the very values they had forgotten. I chose the latter. The microphone felt cool against my fingers as I adjusted it to my height. The ballroom lights were bright, but not as blinding as the realization of what this moment represented. Not just for me, but for everyone present. Thank you, Margaret. I began, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm overwhelmed by this honor, and by seeing so many familiar faces after so many years. I glanced around the room, making eye contact with former students who had risen at Margaret's request. They smiled encouragingly, these adults who had once been children in my classroom. When I began teaching in 1975, I had a simple philosophy that guided me through 43 years in the classroom. I believed and still believe that success isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. Not by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. My gaze drifted to my children's table. Madison sat rigid, her expression unreadable. Nathan stared at his hands. Bradley alone met my eyes, something like shame flickering across his face. I've been fortunate to witness many forms of success in my lifetime, I continued. I've seen the brilliant surgeon who saves lives daily, the attorney who fights for justice, the entrepreneur whose innovations change how we live. I allowed the briefest pause, acknowledging my children's professional achievements without mentioning them directly. These are worthy accomplishments that deserve recognition. But tonight, I'm reminded of other successes that often go uncelebrated. The kindergarten teacher who works with special needs children in an underfunded school. The social worker who helps families stay together during crises. The nurse who holds the hands of the dying when family cannot be present. Around the room, heads nodded in recognition of these quieter forms of contribution. James Wilson, I said, gesturing to the cardiologist, now saves hearts for a living. But I remember when he stayed after school to help a classmate who was struggling with math, even though it meant missing basketball practice. His compassion was evident even then. James smiled, lifting his glass in acknowledgement. Rachel Fernandez advocates for educational policy in the state Senate. But long before that, she created a reading program for seniors at the Mapleton Retirement Home, bringing books and companionship to those who needed both. I continued, highlighting small acts of kindness and character that I remembered from various former students in the room. With each example, I wove a tapestry of success defined not by wealth or status, but by impact on others. These moments may seem small, but they ripple outward in ways we can't always see. A kindness offered to one person extends to many others. Knowledge shared multiplies rather than diminishes. Compassion creates communities where everyone can thrive. I paused, allowing the room to absorb these thoughts. I look at my former students here tonight, and I see success in its truest form, not just in your professional achievements, impressive as they are, but in the people you've become, people who make your corner of the world better through your presence in it. My voice softened as I shared more personal reflections. Teaching was never just a job for me. After my husband William died, my classroom became a lifeline, a place where purpose and meaning continued even when personal grief threatened to overwhelm me. My students, without knowing it, helped heal me through their curiosity, their laughter, their need for guidance and encouragement. I thought of the years of sacrifice, the exhaustion, the worry about money, all worth it for the privilege of being part of young lives taking shape. The announcement of this foundation is a profound honor, one I never expected or sought. But if it helps continue the work of nurturing potential in children who might otherwise be overlooked, then I am deeply grateful. I look directly at my children now, my gaze steady despite the emotion behind my words. I have been blessed with many children in my life, not just the 3 I gave birth to, but the thousands who passed through my classroom. I am proud of all of them in different ways. I treasure the doctor who heals bodies, the lawyer who defends rights, the innovator who creates solutions. But I equally value the parent who raises kind children, the neighbor who builds community, the friend who shows up in difficult times. I could see my words landing with various members of the audience. Some nodded in recognition of values they shared. Others looked thoughtful, perhaps reassessing their own definitions of worth. Success isn't a destination you reach alone. It's a journey we take together, lifting each other along the way. If I've contributed to that journey for any of you, then my life has indeed been well spent. As I concluded, the room erupted in a standing ovation, led by my former students but quickly joined by nearly everyone present. The applause washed over me like a cleansing rain, validating not just my career but my life choices, my values, my understanding of what truly matters. From my vantage point on stage, I could see my children remain seated, their expressions a complex mixture of emotions, embarrassment, confusion, perhaps the first glimmers of recognition that they had misjudged not just me, but the very nature of achievement. As I returned to my seat amid continued applause and people reaching to squeeze my hand or pat my shoulder, I felt a profound sense of both sadness and liberation. Sadness for the relationships that had become so distorted, for the values my children had lost sight of in their pursuit of conventional success. Liberation in knowing that my worth was not dependent on their validation, that my legacy extended far beyond my biological family. The formal program continued, but the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the pitiable mother brought as a prop to highlight how far her children had risen. I was Eleanor Thompson, educator and mentor, whose influence had helped shape doctors, senators, architects, and countless others who lived lives of purpose and compassion. That revelation wouldn't erase the pain of my children's betrayal, but it offered a different perspective, one that allowed me to see them with compassion rather than resentment. They hadn't failed me. They had failed themselves by forgetting what I had tried most to teach them, that how we treat others matters more than what we achieve for ourselves. As the evening began to wind down, I noticed Madison, Nathan, and Bradley huddled together in conversation, occasionally glancing in my direction. Their body language suggested discomfort, uncertainty about how to proceed. I didn't approach them, giving them space to process what had transpired. Whatever happened next would be their choice. I had spoken my truth without bitterness or accusation. The ball, as they say, was in their court. The formal program concluded with closing remarks from the MC, and an invitation to continue enjoying the evening's refreshments. As people began to circulate again, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers, former students eager to reconnect, colleagues from Mapleton Elementary I hadn't seen in years, even parents of children I'd taught decades ago. "Mrs. Thompson, you probably don't remember me," began a distinguished-looking man in his 50s. "Carl Simmons, class of '86. I smiled, the name connecting immediately to a memory. "Of course I remember you, Carl. You wrote that wonderful essay about your grandfather's farm. You had quite a way with words. His face lit up with surprise and pleasure. I can't believe you remember that. I'm a professor of literature now at Berkeley. That doesn't surprise me at all, I replied sincerely. Similar conversations followed, each former student sharing a specific memory of their time in my classroom, the special project I'd created for a struggling reader, the encouragement offered during a difficult family situation, the book recommendation that had opened new worlds. James Wilson, the cardiologist, approached with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to me. To the teacher who made me memorize the circulatory system in 3rd grade, he said with a warm smile. Little did you know where that would lead. I think you would have found your way to medicine regardless, James, I responded. But I'm delighted to have played even a small role in your journey. Not small, Mrs. Thompson. Foundational. His expression grew serious. My father died that year, as you probably remember. School was the only place that made sense to me. You gave me structure when everything else was chaos. Such revelations continued throughout the evening. Moments I had forgotten that had remained significant for my students. Small kindnesses that had created lasting impacts. It was humbling and deeply moving to realize how much influence a teacher could have, often without knowing it. Margaret rejoined me, linking her arm through mine. I'd say the announcement was a success, wouldn't you? Beyond anything I could have imagined, I admitted. Though I suspect it wasn't the evening my children had planned. She followed my gaze to where Madison, Nathan, and Bradley stood awkwardly near the exit, clearly unsure whether to leave or stay. Perhaps this is an opportunity for a different kind of conversation, she suggested gently. I nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. Perhaps it is. I was gathering my courage to approach them when Madison broke away from her brothers and walked toward me, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. She reached me just as another former student was saying goodbye. Mother, she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Do you have a moment? Of course, Madison. We moved to a quieter corner of the rapidly emptying ballroom. Madison seemed to struggle for words, her usual eloquence abandoned. I don't know what to say, she finally admitted. Except that I'm sorry. We're sorry. For what exactly? I asked, not unkindly but needing her to articulate the harm. She swallowed hard. For treating you like a prop tonight. For not telling you about the foundation. For acting like our success happened despite you rather than partly because of you. Her eyes filled with tears, something I hadn't seen since her father's funeral. For forgetting what matters. I reached out and took her hand. Thank you for saying that, Madison. I don't understand how this happened, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. When did I become someone who would treat her own mother this way? Who would be embarrassed by the very person who made everything possible? Success can be disorienting, I said gently. It's easy to start believing that your achievements define your worth, that what you have matters more than who you are. Nathan approached cautiously, having observed our conversation from a distance. Can I join you? He asked, his usual confidence notably absent. I nodded, making space for him. That was quite a revelation tonight, he said awkwardly. All those people whose lives you touched. The foundation in your name. Yes, it was surprising. Why didn't you tell us about it? He asked, then immediately answered his own question. Because we never gave you the chance. We were too busy talking about ourselves. I didn't confirm or deny this, letting him come to his own conclusions. We thought. He hesitated, then forced himself to continue. Honestly, we thought we were the successful ones in the family, that our achievements were what mattered. Tonight made me question everything about how I measure success. Bradley joined us last, his expression more guarded than his siblings. Mother, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Bradley. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until he finally spoke. I've been standing over there trying to remember the last time I called you just to check in. Not on a holiday, not because I needed something. Just because you're my mother and I care about you. He looked genuinely troubled. I couldn't remember. The admission hung in the air, painfully honest. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty, Bradley, I said after a moment. All 3 of you have built successful, busy lives. That's what I wanted for you. To have opportunities to pursue your dreams. But not at the cost of our relationship with you, Madison interjected. Not at the cost of our character. No, I agreed quietly. That was never the plan. Another silence fell, but this one felt different, contemplative rather than awkward. Where do we go from here? Nathan finally asked, the question directed not just to me but to all of us. I don't know, I answered honestly. Relationships can't be rebuilt overnight. Trust takes time to restore. But you're willing to try? Madison asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. After how we've treated you? You're my children, I said simply. That hasn't changed, no matter what else has. We exchanged phone numbers. A small but significant step given how sporadic our communication had become. They promised to call more regularly. I promised to be honest about my feelings rather than pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The first family dinner 2 weeks later was awkward. Conversation stalled frequently, exposing how little we knew about each other's daily lives. Madison talked too much about work. Nathan checked his phone repeatedly. Bradley seemed uncomfortable in the modest restaurant I'd chosen. But they came. And they came again the following month, this time to my house. Madison brought flowers. Nathan fixed my leaking faucet without being asked. Bradley asked about my book club, showing genuine interest in what I was reading. Small steps. Imperfect efforts. But efforts nonetheless. The Eleanor Thompson Education Foundation became a focal point for unexpected healing. My children, perhaps seeking to make amends, became actively involved. Madison offering legal services pro bono. Nathan developing a technology program for underprivileged students. Bradley organizing health screenings at schools served by the foundation. By Christmas, 5 months after that revelatory evening at the Grand Hotel, I hosted a small gathering at my home. My children arrived with their families, including Bradley's twins, who initially regarded me with the wariness of strangers, but gradually warmed up over games of Scrabble and stories about their father's childhood. As we sat around my dining room table, expanded with card tables to accommodate everyone, I looked at the faces of my family. The distance hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still moments of disconnect, conversations where our different worlds became apparent. But there was effort now, and awareness, and the beginning of something that might eventually grow into mutual respect. I'd like to propose a toast, Madison said, raising her glass. To Mom, who taught us that success isn't what you have but what you give. We're still learning that lesson. To Mom, echoed Nathan and Bradley, their glasses joining hers. In that moment, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with validation from my children and everything to do with seeing them rediscover values that truly matter. Life doesn't offer perfect resolutions or fairy tale endings. Relationships damaged over years don't heal in months. But that evening, watching my family attempt to bridge the chasms that had grown between us, I found myself grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought us to this point. The party planned to shame me had instead become a catalyst for change. Not just for my children, but for me as well. I had rediscovered my own worth separate from their validation. I had reconnected with the impact of my life's work. I had learned that standing in your truth, without bitterness or resentment, can be more powerful than any retaliation. Success, I realize more deeply than ever, comes in many forms. Sometimes it looks like professional achievement and financial prosperity. Sometimes it looks like a family finding its way back to each other, imperfectly but sincerely. Sometimes it looks like the quiet knowledge that your life has mattered in ways you may never fully know. What's your definition of success? Has it changed as you've grown older? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Remember, we all leave legacies. The question is what kind. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find joy in both your achievements and your connections with others.